The room is quiet now, and the rain has settled into a steady, patient rhythm on the glass. You sit with one desk lamp, one lukewarm coffee, and one thin folder that refuses to feel finished. The paper smells faintly of dust and old toner, the kind of scent that tells you this story has been waiting. You think a lie detector is a truth machine. Calm, scientific, final. Wrong. It is more like a stress thermometer, listening to breath, sweat, and heartbeat, and guessing at the rest. Tonight, with the Sleepless Detective keeping the light low, you will drift through the weird little ways people try to look clean on paper, even when the facts still feel dirty. You open the folder anyway, because that is what you do when the world is sleeping and the paperwork is not. The first page is a summary, and it reads like a small lie wrapped in official language. The polygraph results were called inconclusive, then later described as no significant reaction, then later still, in a different memo, treated like a quiet pass. That kind of drift does not happen because the machine found truth. It happens because people start using the machine as a prop, a lever, a way to make a room feel certain when the facts are still unsettled. Polygraph testing, in the plainest terms, records your body, breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, skin conductance, which is just a fancy way to say how much your skin sweats when your nervous system wakes up. It does not detect lies. It detects arousal, a bump in your internal weather. And the annoying thing, the deeply human thing, is that arousal can come from anything. Shame, fear, anger, confusion, a memory you did not plan on having tonight. You can be innocent and still light up the chart like a Christmas tree because you are sitting in a small room strapped to sensors, being asked questions that could ruin your life. You turn a page and you find the first question the case asks you. Why did the results look clean when the facts felt dirty? The report describes the subject as cooperative. That word always shows up when someone wants you to stop looking too hard. Cooperative means he showed up. Cooperative means he smiled at the examiner. Cooperative means he did not flip a table. But you have learned something that takes years to learn, and even longer to admit. The calmest person in the room is not always the most honest. Sometimes they are just the most practiced at being calm. Some people rehearse calm the way others rehearse speeches, until their face can hold still, even when the story underneath is moving. And that is the first trick, really. People do not always beat the machine. They manage the story around the machine. They treat the polygraph like a stage, not a test. They show up early, so it looks like eagerness. They bring paperwork, so it looks like organization. They ask the examiner about their day, so it feels friendly. They sit like someone with nothing to hide, because sitting like that is free. You glance at the bottom of the page and see an old note in a detective's handwriting. Not elegant, not poetic, just tired ink. Looks too good. You read it twice because you know that feeling. When a narrative fits too neatly, it is usually because someone trimmed off the inconvenient parts. Reality does not like clean edges. Reality frays. The next pages are about the polygraph itself and the way it is used in the real world. You are reminded, again, that it is not one single moment of truth. It is a process with a lot of room for human interpretation. There is the pre-test interview where the examiner explains the test, builds rapport, and decides what questions will be asked. There is the actual chart collection, where the sensors draw their thin, trembling lines. Then there is the post-test phase, where the examiner talks and watches and sometimes pushes. And in that structure, the machine is only part of the story. The rest is a person in a chair and another person reading them, and both of them dragging their own assumptions into the room. So when you hear someone say they beat the lie detector, you imagine the room, not the wires. You imagine the way a suspect might steer the conversation before the sensors ever touch skin. You imagine the examiner, tired, under time pressure, working cases like a clerk works a long line at the counter. You imagine how easy it is for a confident performer to turn an evaluation into a friendly chat. The folder gives you one example from a different case. Included as training material: a burglary crew, low level, ordinary, the kind that steals what they can carry and brags about it later. One of them gets pulled in for a polygraph related to a separate assault. He agrees. He is polite. He laughs in the right places. And the entire time, he keeps telling the examiner softly that he hates needles, hates doctors, hates being watched. He says it like a confession of vulnerability, like honesty. When the test starts, his body reacts on the relevant questions, but it also reacts on the baseline questions. His charts look messy. The examiner calls it inconclusive. Later, when detectives dig into phone data and witness statements, the guy is tied to the assault anyway. He did not beat the test with some secret technique. He just muddied the water early by setting the emotional temperature in the room. You sit back a little, and the chair makes a small complaint. The rain keeps going. That steady sound always makes you think of time, and of how time does not care about anyone's performance. A lie detector, if you strip away the myth, is a tool for pressure. It can make people talk. It can make them confess. It can also make them panic and say something wrong. But if a person understands that, if they understand it is not magic, they might try something else. They might focus not on truth, but on calm. And once you accept that the machine only listens to the body, you start watching what people do to their bodies on purpose. You read the next section like a slow list of small, strange human choices. Not Hollywood tricks, not gadgets, just the body turned into a quiet machine. One method shows up again and again in old training notes: controlled breathing. The suspect tries to breathe evenly, slowly, like they are about to fall asleep. It sounds gentle, almost healthy. But in a polygraph room, it can be a strategy. Breathing affects heart rate. It affects blood pressure. It affects the rhythm of the chart. If someone can keep their breath steady and keep it steady through uncomfortable questions, they can sometimes reduce the contrast between truth and lie. You imagine it now. You are in the chair. The cuff is tight on your arm. The tubes sit around your chest like polite restraints. The finger sensors feel ridiculous, like you are being measured for a suit you do not want. The examiner asks something neutral: your name, your age, simple facts. Then the examiner asks a comparison question, something meant to make you slightly uncomfortable. Have you ever lied to get out of trouble? Have you ever taken something that did not belong to you? And you, being human, have. Almost everyone has. So your body reacts a little. That is the point. The test needs a baseline of discomfort, a known ripple in the water. Now, imagine a suspect who knows that. They try to make those comparison questions look more stressful than the relevant ones. They try to turn the baseline into a storm, so the real waves do not stand out. This is where the weird little methods come in. The things that sound silly until you remember the machine is only reading the body. Small pain is one of the classics. Pressing a toe hard into the floor, curling it inside the shoe, biting the inside of the cheek, pressing a thumbnail into the palm. Tiny discomforts hidden where an examiner might not see. The goal is not to endure agony. The goal is to create a small spike in the body's signal at the right moment. On the easy questions, if the innocent questions look stressful, then the relevant questions do not look special. Everything becomes noisy. Everything becomes less readable. It is the same logic as turning up a television so you do not hear the neighbor's argument through the wall. The argument is still there. You are not solving anything. You are just covering it with static. In the file, there is a note from an examiner about what this looks like in real life. The person sits oddly stiff. Their shoulders do not relax. Their legs seem locked. They swallow at strange times. And that is the funny part, the grimly predictable part. People think deception is about being smooth, but a lot of deceptive behavior is about being controlled. They want to control their breathing, control their posture, control the pace, but control has a texture. It looks like someone trying not to move on a crowded bus. It looks like someone holding in a cough during a quiet meeting. It looks unnatural. You flip another page and find a case vignette, short and dry, like the system is trying not to remember it too vividly. A missing person investigation. A spouse is asked to take a polygraph, not because polygraphs are perfect, but because investigators need a lever. The spouse agrees. Calm, mild, almost too mild. During the test, the examiner notices something small. On certain questions, the spouse's foot shifts, but not in a nervous tapping way. More like pressure, more like a deliberate push. The movement is tiny, just enough to miss if you are not staring at the floor. After the test, the examiner asks the spouse to remove their shoes, not as a punishment, as a reset. They run a second chart with feet visible and hands resting open. The results change. Does that prove guilt? No. It proves only this. The machine was reacting to something, and the something was not just the questions. In the end, that case turns on other evidence, because that is how real investigations end. Phone records, surveillance, a neighbor who heard an argument at the wrong time, a trash bag that should have been heavier. But the polygraph moment sticks with you because it is so human. A person trying to cheat a test with a toe. You keep reading. Another common trick is to alter breathing on purpose, especially during comparison questions. A person may hold their breath slightly, or breathe shallowly, or take a larger breath at a predictable point. Breathing patterns can distort the physiological readings. An experienced examiner watches for that. They mark it, they stop the chart, and they correct it. Or they do not. And that depends on training, on time, on confidence, on how the examiner reads the room. Because, again, the machine is not judging you. A person is. You look at the folder's margins, and you see a line that makes you exhale through your nose. Someone wrote years ago, in dull pencil, like they did not want the paper to hear it. Everyone thinks they can outsmart it. You have met enough suspects to know that belief comes in two flavors. The desperate kind, where a person is trying to survive the moment, and the arrogant kind, where a person thinks rules are for other people. The weird methods tend to come from the second group, people who read a guide online, people who heard a cousin's story, people who watched a late-night show and mistook a joke for a blueprint. They walk into the polygraph room thinking they are holding secret knowledge. They are not. They are holding a trick that examiners have seen since before they had decent coffee. But sometimes, the trick does not have to be brilliant. It only has to create enough doubt that the result becomes unusable, enough fog to buy time. And time is always the first currency of crime. You let that thought sit, and you turn the page slowly. There is another tactic, quieter and almost boring in how common it is. The suspect tries to flood their mind with calm images. A beach, a song, a prayer, a repeating phrase. It is not mystical, it is a form of mental distraction. If you can keep your attention away from the meaning of the question, you might reduce the emotional reaction. You imagine someone doing it. The examiner asks, "Did you take the money from the safe?" And the person hears only the rhythm of the words, not the weight. They answer no while thinking about ocean waves. In some cases, it can blunt the response. In other cases, the effort itself creates strain. Trying to force calm can be stressful. The body does not like being commanded. It is like trying to fall asleep on purpose. The harder you try, the louder your mind gets. The more you grip the moment, the more it slips. The file includes a short explanation of why comparison questions matter and why countermeasures aim at them. Comparison questions are designed to be uncomfortable for almost anyone, so the examiner has a standard reaction to compare against. If you can artificially increase your reaction to comparison questions, then the relevant questions might appear less significant. That is the theory. It is not always effective, but it is common enough that examiners are trained to look for it. They look for physical movements, even tiny ones. They look for unnatural breathing patterns. They look for jaw tension that suggests tongue biting. They look for hands that clench and unclench in a rhythm that matches the question timing. And then, sometimes, they look for something else. The moment when a person seems less interested in answering and more interested in performing the test. You think back to the line in the first memo: cooperative, calm, clean chart. Then you think about the other notes. The facts felt dirty. The thing about a polygraph is that it is not usually the end of the road. It is a tool used in the middle when investigators are trying to decide where to push next. If the polygraph says no significant reaction, some people relax. They stop pressing. They feel, briefly, that the universe has given them a yes or no. But the universe does not do yes or no. It does maybe. It does probably. It does a long pause while you chase paperwork, so you do not let the clean chart lull you. You start asking what happened around it. Who scheduled the test? Who suggested it? How quickly? Under what conditions? What questions were asked? And in what order? How long the pre-test interview lasted? Whether the subject asked for breaks? Whether the subject requested to rephrase questions? Because controlling the body is one path. Controlling the room is another. But you are not there yet. Not quite. You stay with the body a little longer because the file keeps offering you these small, strange, almost pathetic tricks. There is another countermeasure people talk about. usually with a confidence they did not earn. The idea of mental arithmetic. Doing math in your head during certain questions to change your physiological response? The theory is that concentrating hard can alter your breathing and heart rate. It can add noise. It can flatten peaks. It can make the chart harder to interpret. In practice, it can also make you look like you are concentrating hard, which is not a crime. But it is not the relaxed innocence people like to project. And the more you try to game the process, the more you risk creating a new pattern, one the examiner can notice. It is a little like forging handwriting. People focus on making it look normal, but they add consistent oddities. A loop too careful, a line too straight, a signature that looks like it was drawn, not written. Your body does the same thing when you force it. It becomes an imitation of calm, not calm. You read an anecdote from an examiner, written in a tone that tries to sound professional and fails. The examiner describes a subject who kept smiling, not because anything was funny, just smiling, like a mask glued on. The subject's charts were strange, not strong reactions to relevant questions, not strong reactions to comparison questions either. Everything was flat. Flat charts are not proof of anything, but they make an examiner suspicious in a different way. They raise questions about medication, about fatigue, about deliberate suppression, about whether the person is dissociating or simply refusing to engage. The examiner ended the test and wrote, "Subject presented as overly controlled." Overly controlled. You have met that type. They speak slowly. They choose simple words. They keep their hands still. They answer exactly what is asked, no more. It can look like honesty at first, clean, efficient. Then you realize it is not honesty. It is containment. And containment always makes you wonder what is inside. You let the pages rest for a moment. You take one sip of the coffee, and it tastes like regret and heat. Somewhere outside, a car passes through wet streets, and the sound is brief and distant. You think about how these countermeasures spread, not through criminal masterminds, through boredom, through late-night searching, through half-remembered advice from someone who swears they know a guy. You think about how that advice becomes legend. A suspect tells another suspect, "You just bite your tongue on the easy questions, and you will pass." They say it like it is a cheat code, like life is a game. And for a moment, maybe, the chart becomes messy, inconclusive, useless. The suspect walks out thinking they won, but then the investigation keeps going, quietly, patiently, like rain. Because the real world is full of record keepers that do not care how calm you looked in a chair. Still, in the moment, that little window matters. It buys time. It makes a detective hesitate. It gives a defense attorney a talking point. And sometimes that is all a person needs, not to be innocent, just to be unprovable for a while. You go back to the folder's main case, the one that refuses to feel finished. The subject in this file was not some hardened criminal with prison stories. He was ordinary on paper. Job, routine, family photos on a desk, the kind of person who knows how to sound reasonable. He volunteered for the polygraph. That always looks good. People love voluntariness. It feels like a sign, like a moral gesture. But voluntariness can be a move, a way to control timing, a way to create an impression, a way to say, "Look, I have nothing to hide," while deciding exactly how and when you will be questioned. The report notes that he requested the test after an informal interview. He asked about it directly. He seemed to know what it measured. He asked how long it would take. Those are not damning questions. They are just informed. Congratulations! You have just met someone who is thinking about the process instead of the truth. In the pre-test interview, he appeared relaxed. He spoke in a steady voice. He maintained eye contact. He joked lightly about being nervous, but did not look nervous. You can almost see it. The polite smile, the careful posture, the way he makes the examiner feel like a professional doing a clean job. Then the test begins. The charts come back as no significant reaction. The examiner writes that the subject was straightforward, and yet the detective on the case writes something else. Later, in a note that feels like a bruise, his timeline keeps changing. That is the dirty fact. The timeline, where he was, when he left, when he returned, the small shifts in minutes that become miles when you map them. Polygraphs do not map miles. They map nerves. You continue reading. The detective lists the shifts. First, he said he got home around 9. Then it was 9:30. Then it was closer to 10, but he could not be sure because he did not check the clock. Then he said he stopped for gas. Then he said he did not stop. He just remembered passing a station. Then he said he did stop, but he paid cash, so there was no record. You know this pattern. It is not automatically guilt. Sometimes memory is messy. Sometimes people are tired, stressed, and bad at time. But when time shifts, always move in one helpful direction. You start to notice. And this is where the polygraph becomes what it really is. A spotlight that makes some people sweat. A room that makes some people talk too much. A performance that makes some people overact. If the subject passed the test but cannot keep his timeline straight, you have to decide which you trust. You already know the answer. You trust the parts of the world that do not have feelings. A gas station has a camera. A highway has toll data. A phone has location history. A receipt has a timestamp. A door has a lock that records entries. A neighbor has a doorbell camera that never sleeps because it does not have a life. But you are not at the evidence yet. Not fully. Right now, you are still watching the way people try to look clean. You return briefly to the body methods because the file includes one more that feels almost childish. Muscle tensing. Some people tense certain muscles during comparison questions. The thigh, the calf, the buttocks. Subtle enough, they hope, to avoid detection, but enough to create changes in blood pressure and respiration. An examiner who is attentive can sometimes see it. A slight stiffening, a shift in posture, a deep breath held too long. And an examiner can respond by adjusting the subject's position, by reminding them to sit still, by repeating charts, by changing question order. It becomes a quiet chess game, played with nerves and breathing. Only it is not really chess. Chess has rules and elegance. This is more like a late-night argument through a thin wall. Passive aggression and small tactics and the slow realization that nobody is being honest about what they want. You imagine the subject sitting perfectly still, sweating just a little, trying not to show the work. And you imagine the examiner watching, making notes, deciding whether this is nervousness or manipulation. In some rooms, that judgment is sharp. In others, it is soft. In others, it is rushed. And rushed is where mistakes grow. The folder mentions in a training appendix that countermeasures are one reason polygraph results are not generally admitted as evidence in many courts. The science is contested, the interpretation varies, the vulnerability to manipulation is real. So why do investigators still use them? Because the polygraph is not only a test, it is an event. It creates a psychological moment. A suspect makes a choice to take it or refuse it. They prepare, they ask questions, they worry, they perform. And in that performance, they sometimes reveal things the machine never could. A person who says they want the truth may still try to control every detail. A person who claims to have nothing to hide may become obsessed with how the results will be described. A person who is innocent may be terrified, not of the question, but of being misunderstood. Those reactions matter, not as proof, but as texture, as direction. You sit with that, and you let it stay calm. No sudden revelations, just the slow understanding that the human body is readable, but not in the simple way people want. You turn another page, and there is an excerpt from a different case, used as a cautionary tale. A young man accused of a serious assault. He insists he is innocent. He agrees to a polygraph because he believes it will save him. He is anxious. His charts show strong reactions. He is labeled deceptive. Later, the real offender is identified through deoxyribonucleic acid evidence. The young man was innocent the whole time, and his nervous system got him branded. It is a quiet tragedy, and it is why you never worship the machine. It is why you treat it like weather. It tells you something about the air, but it does not tell you what will happen tomorrow. And it is why you return, again, to that first question in your folder. Why did the results look clean when the facts felt dirty? Because clean results can happen for many reasons. Because some guilty people stay calm. Because some people rehearse. Because some people manipulate baseline questions. Because some examiners are rushed, or charmed, or simply human. You stare at the line that says no significant reaction. You imagine it as a stamp that says, probably fine. Probably is a dangerous word. You keep moving because the file is leading you toward the next kind of method, the kind that does not live in muscles or breath, but in social space. But the body methods leave a final taste in your mind. They are not clever. They are small. They are petty. They are the kind of thing a person does when they want to cheat without being seen cheating. And the worst part is, sometimes small petty methods are enough to shift a decision. A detective pauses. A prosecutor hesitates. A supervisor says, "Let us not push too hard." He passed. The world likes shortcuts. The world likes a number, a printout, a clean sentence. And that is why you have to be stubborn. You let the pages slide under your fingers, and you picture the polygraph room again. The wires, the cuff, the quiet hum of air conditioning, the examiner's pen scratching. You picture the suspect's toe pressing into the shoe, the tongue biting softly, the breath measured like a metronome, and you think, yes, the body can be trained. The body can be tricked, but the body is not the only thing in the room, because in the end, the most effective method is often not pain or breath or muscle tension. It is making the examiner like you. It is turning the test into conversation. It is making the whole thing feel less like an interrogation and more like a friendly misunderstanding that will clear up any minute now if everyone would just relax and be reasonable. But the facts do not relax. They wait. And with that thought, you slide into the next set of notes, the ones about how suspects work the room with charm, confusion, and a kind of friendly fog. You learn the difference the hard way, the difference between a person answering questions and a person hosting the room, because that is what charm does when it is weaponized. It turns an interrogation into a living room. It puts a throw blanket over the sharp parts. It makes the examiner feel rude for doing their job. You can hear it in the way a practiced subject starts talking before the question has even landed. Not panicked talking, not rambling, just a smooth stream of friendly context. Oh, that question, sure. That reminds me of this one time at work. It is funny, actually. You know, I am the kind of person who, and suddenly, the session is not about measurement. It is about vibes. It is about whether the examiner feels like they are dealing with a decent human being, which is a sweet idea until you remember decent human beings do terrible things all the time. Usually with good posture, you read the training notes and you see it described in a dry phrase, rapport building, like it is neutral, like it is just part of procedure. It is part of procedure, sure, but it is also the moment a subject decides what role they want to play. Victim, volunteer, helpful citizen, confused bystander, offended, innocent, and you, sitting in your chair with your lukewarm coffee, can practically watch them try on the roles, like jackets, checking the mirror to see which one makes them look safest. There is a reason polygraph examiners talk so much before the sensors go on. They want the subject to commit to a story. They want a baseline for behavior. They want to see what normal looks like for this person. But the clever ones, the ones who have rehearsed, they use the same time for the opposite purpose. They build a little fog bank in the room. They compliment the examiner's professionalism. They mention how stressful this must be for law enforcement. They drop a line about supporting the police. Not too much. Just enough to make the examiner feel like, finally, someone gets it. Congratulations, you have just watched someone try to purchase benefit of the doubt with a few warm sentences. And it works more often than people want to admit because this job is tiring. Because most days, you do not get gratitude. You get hostility, or lies, or silence. So when someone shows up smiling and says they appreciate what you do, your brain, tired and human, leans toward them. Not all the way. Just a few degrees. That is all it takes. You turn a page, and the file gives you a small scene from an internal seminar. Not glamorous. A beige room. Bad chairs. Someone clicking through slides like they are serving a sentence. The instructor describes a subject who brought donuts to the station. Donuts. Sugar and grease in a cardboard box. The unofficial currency of polite manipulation. The subject sets them on the table like an offering. He laughs a little, says he knows it is a long day, says he just wants to help clear this up. And now the examiner has a choice. Refuse and look suspiciously harsh, or accept and feel, on some level, indebted. Even if the examiner refuses, the move still works. Because the attempt communicates something. I am friendly. I am cooperative. I am safe, and the machine cannot measure that, but people can feel it. The notes explain it in plain language. Humans interpret the printouts. They decide whether the squiggles matter. They decide whether a spike is significant. They decide whether the subject was trying to be deceptive or just nervous. So the subject tries to influence the human. They do it with charm, yes, but also with confusion. Confusion is the quieter cousin of charm. Charm is the warm lamp. Confusion is the dimmer switch. If the subject can make the process feel complicated, if they can make every question feel like it has 5 interpretations, then nothing lands cleanly. They ask for definitions. What do you mean by take? Do you mean physically remove? Or do you mean approve the transfer? What do you mean by no? Do you mean I knew for sure or I suspected? What do you mean by that night? Do you mean after midnight or before midnight? Some of those questions are fair. Language matters. Precision matters. Investigators make mistakes when words are sloppy, but there is a difference between seeking clarity and drowning the room in it. You know it when you see it because it has a rhythm. It always shows up on the questions that matter most. The irrelevant questions go down easy. The relevant ones turn into a committee meeting. And while everyone debates phrasing, the clock moves, the room warms, the subject gets to settle in, the urgency softens. It is amazing how many weird criminal methods are just methods of making adults tired. The training notes mention a tactic that sounds harmless until you have lived through it. The subject keeps asking for breaks. Not dramatic breaks, just small ones. Can I use the restroom? Can I get water? This cuff is too tight. My back hurts. I need to stretch. My phone is buzzing. It might be my boss. Each request, on its own, is reasonable. You cannot punish someone for being a person with a bladder and a spine. But stacked together, they do something. They chop the session into pieces. They prevent the examiner from building momentum. They keep the subject from getting cornered by the steady repetition of questions. Because repetition is part of the polygraph's pressure. Not magical pressure, psychological pressure. Same questions, same order. Again and again. A person can lie once, but by the 6th time, the lie starts to squeak. It starts to feel old in the mouth. Breaks interrupt that. It is like someone pausing a song right before the chorus, over and over until you forget how the melody is supposed to resolve. You read about another case, not the main one, but close enough to taste. An insurance fraud investigation. A man claims his boat was stolen. Expensive boat, convenient timing. He volunteers for a polygraph. He arrives with a smile and a folder of documents like he is presenting a school project. He calls the examiner sir or ma'am with the smoothness of a practiced customer service voice. In the pre-test interview, he tells long stories, not about the theft, about his childhood, about how he worked hard for everything, about how he hates thieves. He keeps circling back to his own moral identity like he is painting a halo with words. The examiner, trained to listen, lets him talk. People reveal things when they talk, but the man is careful. The stories are emotional, yet strangely low on checkable details. No dates, no names, no receipts, just feelings. That is a type of fog too, emotional fog. It fills the room with sentiment so there is less space for timelines. When the test begins, the charts are not dramatic. They are mildly reactive, mildly flat. The examiner calls it inconclusive, and the man leaves the building, walking a little taller. Later, a bored investigator pulls marina records. The boat was not stolen. It was quietly moved to a storage dock under a different name with a cash payment. The man did not beat science. He beat a moment of uncertainty. You sit with that word, inconclusive, because it is the softest weapon in the world. It is not a lie. It is not an accusation. It is a shrug in official form, and people love a shrug when they need doubt. The notes in your file say something you have always known, but never enjoyed admitting. The polygraph room is a theater, and the examiner is both audience and critic. Some subjects play it like a late-night talk show. They keep the tone light. They tease the examiner gently. You must see this all the time, huh? Bet you have heard every excuse. I guess I should not try any of those tricks I read online. They say it with a smile. They say it like a joke. But it is not just a joke. It is a probe. It is a way of asking, without asking, how much the examiner knows. If the examiner laughs and says, "Oh yeah, we see everything," the subject files that away. If the examiner looks annoyed, the subject files that away too. Either way, the subject is gathering data. And the saddest part is, the subject does not need to be brilliant. They just need to be social. A lot of investigators and examiners are not social by nature. They are method people, paper people, pattern people. So a warm, chatty subject can tilt the dynamic simply by being the kind of person who makes small talk feel effortless. You read another line in the margins, probably from someone who was sick of being fooled. He weaponized nice like a pillow over your face. That is the job, sometimes translating polite behavior into its darker purpose. Not because you want to be cynical, because you have to be. The file reminds you of a basic procedural fact. Polygraph results can be used as an investigative lead. They can guide interviews. They can narrow focus. But they are also used as leverage in negotiation, in plea discussions, in internal reviews. Sometimes they are used as a kind of social proof. He passed, and when passed, is treated like a moral certificate. Charm becomes even more valuable because charm helps get you the label, and the label helps you survive the scrutiny long enough for the real evidence to cool. You find a case note about a subject who kept bringing the conversation back to family. He mentions his kids. He mentions his spouse's health. He mentions a parent in the hospital. Not always in a manipulative way. Sometimes it is just the truth of their life. But in some interviews, it is placed like a chess piece. Because if the examiner sees you as a caretaker, it becomes harder to imagine you as a threat. If the examiner imagines your child's face, they feel a pinch of guilt for pressing too hard. That pinch is human. It is not weakness. It is just human. And criminals, the ones who make a habit of it, learn to lean on the human parts. They do not need to be monsters. They just need to be willing to use people. There is a small section in your notes about overhelpfulness. It sounds benign, like someone who offers to carry your groceries. In the polygraph context, overhelpfulness can look like this. The subject offers to suggest the questions. Well, I assume you will ask if I hurt her, and I did not, so that one is fine. You will probably ask if I was there. I was not, so that is fine too. You might ask if I know who did it, and I do not. It is neat. It is tidy. It is also control. Because if the subject can frame the questions, they can frame the scope. They can steer away from uncomfortable angles. Did you hurt her becomes, did you kill her? And suddenly, the subject can answer no, honestly, while still hiding a lesser involvement. Polygraph questions have to be precise because the body reacts to what the mind thinks is being asked, not what the examiner intended. So when a subject tries to negotiate wording, you do not treat it as cooperation. You treat it as a possible attempt to build a loophole. Congratulations, you have discovered the spiritual cousin of fine print. The file gives you a real example, scrubbed of names, a corporate theft case, missing inventory that walked out the back door in neat little pieces. A manager is tested. The manager insists on a specific phrasing, "I did not steal company property." The examiner prefers, "Did you take any company property without permission?" The manager says those are different. The manager says steal is a legal term. The manager says they do not want to agree to legal language. Reasonable, maybe. Also convenient. If your defense is, "I did not steal, I just borrowed," or "I just authorized," or "I just did not stop it." Words matter. People hide inside them like closets. The examiner pushes for clarity. The manager pushes back with politeness so thick you could spread it on toast. In the end, the questions are adjusted. The charts are ambiguous. The manager walks. Later, inventory logs and badge access show the manager was in the building after hours, repeatedly during the theft window. A camera catches a shadow moving boxes. The manager did not beat the machine. The manager beat a moment of imprecision. You start to see the pattern. All these weird methods share a simple goal: create enough uncertainty that the polygraph becomes a footnote instead of a hammer. And the easiest way to do that is to make the room feel friendly, complicated, and morally simple. Friendly, so nobody wants to accuse you. Complicated, so nobody can pin you. Morally simple, so your story has a clean hero, you. In your main file, the subject did something that reads as small, almost forgettable. He asked the examiner about the examiner's credentials. Where did you train? How long have you done this? How accurate is it? What is your success rate? Again, not illegal, not even inherently suspicious. But in context, it can be part of a larger move. If you can make the examiner defend the process, you shift the power dynamic. The examiner becomes the one being evaluated. That is subtle. It is also exhausting. And exhaustion is the oldest trick in the book. The detective's note says the subject talked for nearly 2 hours before the sensors were ever attached. 2 hours. That is not an interview anymore. That is a slow sedative made of words. By the time the test starts, the subject's nervous system has had time to settle. The novelty has worn off. The fear has had time to dull around the edges. And the examiner, if they are not careful, is no longer meeting a stranger. They are meeting someone they have spent 2 hours with. Someone who feels, in a low-level way, familiar. And familiarity is dangerous in an investigation because familiarity feels like knowledge, but it is not. you read one more training point, simple and bleak. People who plan to manipulate a polygraph often focus on the examiner's humanity. They mirror posture, they match tone, they laugh when the examiner laughs, they nod when the examiner speaks. Mirroring is a normal social behavior, but it can also be deliberate. It creates rapport fast. If you want to see it in your mind, picture a conversation where the other person keeps matching your tempo, like you are dancing, and they never step on your toes. It feels good. It feels safe. And safety is exactly what a guilty person wants you to feel. Right up until you stop looking closely. You turn another page. The notes shift from charm into something colder. Because charm is one tool, but it is not the only way to work a room. Some people use a kind of controlled helplessness. They act overwhelmed. They act confused. They act fragile. They sigh. They rub their forehead. They say they have been under so much stress lately. They do not flirt with the examiner's liking. They flirt with the examiner's protective instincts. And that can be just as effective. A human being does not want to bully someone who looks like they might break. So the examiner softens. The language softens. The questions soften. The subject stays in control the whole time, while appearing to have none. The file calls it impression management, which is a polite phrase for something ugly, curating how you are perceived, so the process bends around you. You have seen it outside the polygraph room too, in interviews, in court, in press conferences where a person asks for privacy while reading from a prepared statement. People think deception is about inventing facts. Often, it is about inventing a self. Now, all of this is useful and interesting and grimly predictable. But the notes make a point you respect. Charm is not guaranteed. Confusion is not always tolerated. Some examiners are immune or just too tired to be pulled in. So if working the room fails, the next method is to work something else. Not the body, not the room, the mind. You feel the tone of the file change here. It gets quieter, less social, more internal, because this is where you meet the people who do not try to be liked. They try to be unreadable. They treat their own thoughts like contraband, and they practice and practice until their mind becomes a locked room with no windows. You see it described in a phrase that sounds almost admiring until you remember what it implies. Practiced calm, not natural calm, not the calm of someone innocent and sleepy, the calm of someone who rehearsed their story so many times it lost its edges. You can picture it easily. You are sitting across from them. They have a posture that never changes. Their hands stay folded. Their voice stays level. Every answer arrives after the same pause, like a metronome clicking in the dark. They do not argue. They do not charm. They do not even seem afraid. They simply recite. The notes compare it indirectly to acting, and that is exactly what it is. A performance designed to be repeatable under stress, because real memory has texture. It has unevenness. It has odd details that pop up late and contradictions that get resolved. A rehearsed line is smooth. It is too smooth. You think of it like a lullaby. Same melody, same cadence, same safe ending, and when you ask them the story again, you get the same song, note for note. That consistency can fool people at first. We associate consistency with honesty, but you have learned the uncomfortable truth. Consistency can also mean rehearsal. In your file, the subject's story is written out in 3 different interview summaries. You read them back to back, and you notice the phrasing is almost identical. Not just the facts, the words. I left work. I drove straight home. I made a simple dinner. I watched a little television. I went to bed. Simple, clean, forgettable. It is the kind of story you tell when you want nothing to snag. And the notes underline an important idea for polygraphs and beyond. Rehearsed stories avoid details that can be checked. No mention of which station was on television. No mention of what was for dinner. No mention of a phone call, a text, a stop at a store, because details become hooks, and investigators love hooks. A hook gives you something to pull on, so the rehearsed subject gives you cotton instead. Soft, slippery, hard to grip. You look at the polygraph portion of the file again, and you see how this matters. A polygraph question is not a philosophical debate. It is usually narrow. Did you do this? Were you there? Do you know where the item is? If the subject has rehearsed their denial until it feels like brushing their teeth, their body may not react strongly. Not because they are telling the truth, but because the lie is no longer emotionally sharp. It has been sanded down by repetition. And repetition is a strange thing. You can repeat a lie so often, it starts to feel like a memory. Not a real memory, but a practiced pathway in the brain. A well-worn trail. The notes mention something called habituation. It is a technical word that means your nervous system stops reacting as strongly to the same stimulus over time, like living near train tracks. The first night you hear every passing train. 2 months later, you sleep through it. A person can do that with a lie too. The first time they say it, their heart jumps. The 20th time, their body treats it like a script. That is the locked mind method in its simplest form. Do not fight the machine in the moment. Train yourself beforehand so there is less reaction to measure. You see a small caution in the notes. This is not always deliberate. Some people dissociate under stress. Some people shut down emotionally. Some people have mental health conditions that flatten affect. So you cannot treat calm as guilt, but you also cannot treat calm as innocence. You treat it as a data point, and you keep looking for what does not rehearse well. Because a rehearsed story has limits. It handles expected questions. It handles the obvious angles, but it struggles with the sideways ones. You imagine yourself doing it? Because second person is honest that way. You are in the chair, and you have practiced your lines. You expect, where were you? You expect, did you know her? You expect, did you take it? But then the examiner asks something that does not fit your script. What was the weather like when you left? Which hand did you use to unlock the door? What did you do with your shoes when you got home? Small questions, domestic questions, questions that sound almost stupid. And that is why they work. Because real memory answers them with messy truth. You remember your shoes because they were wet. You remember you used your left hand because your right was holding a bag. A rehearsed story pauses too long, or answers too cleanly, or gets irritated. And irritation is one of the few emotions that leaks out of a locked room. The file includes an anecdote from a seasoned interviewer. He says he likes questions that force a person to visualize a scene, not because visualization is magical, but because it creates cognitive load. If you actually recall being in your kitchen, your mind pulls up sensory details without effort. If you are inventing it, you have to build the kitchen while you talk. And building takes time. That time shows up as pauses, as filler words, as a sudden stiffness in the face. Again, not proof, but texture. The locked mind method also includes rehearsed posture. Some subjects keep their hands in the same place. They keep their feet planted. They keep their gaze steady. They treat their own body like a prop that must not betray them. In a polygraph chair, this can look like someone trying to be a statue, but statues are strange in rooms meant for living people. The examiner notices the subject does not shift, does not scratch an itch. And you know what is funny? Innocent people fidget all the time. Guilty people also fidget, but often in different patterns. The point is not movement. The point is natural movement. The locked mind person sometimes overcorrects. They try to look innocent by looking controlled, and control becomes the tell. You read a section about rehearsed language. Some subjects pick a phrase and stick to it. I did not do that. I have no knowledge of that. I do not recall. Those lines can be legal advice, or personal habit, or fear. But they can also be a deliberate groove, a safe track to run on, so the subject never has to improvise. Improvisation is dangerous when you are lying, because improvisation creates new details, and new details can be disproved, so the locked mind subject becomes boring on purpose. Boredom as armor. That fits the title of your night, in a way. Boring crime for sleep and boring crime for survival. You flip to another page and you see a list of interview strategies used to crack rehearsed calm. The list is plain, but you can feel the years behind it. Change the order of questions. Ask for the story backwards. Ask for a second telling with different starting points. Introduce a verified fact mid-story and watch the subject adjust. Because the locked mind depends on stability. It depends on the subject staying inside their practiced corridor. When you rearrange the furniture, they bump into corners. And those bumps, those small stumbles, are where reality peeks through. The file gives you a case example, quiet and unsettling. A man is questioned about a late-night incident, a violent one. He has a rehearsed line, "I was at home all night." He says it the same way every time, calm, flat, almost bored. The interviewer asks him to describe his living room in detail. The man describes it too perfectly, like he is reading a listing. Couch, television, coffee table, lamp. The interviewer asks, "What is on the coffee table?" The man pauses. He says, "Magazines." The interviewer asks, "Which magazines?" The man gets irritated. He says he does not know. He does not pay attention to that. But a person who spent the night on that couch, anxious and awake, might remember the stupid things they stared at. A sports cover, a receipt, a remote control with tape on the back. Irritation grows. Later, phone location places the man miles away. The rehearsal held until the world's little record keepers contradicted it. You see how the pieces connect now. The polygraph can be pressured. The body can be managed. The room can be fogged. The mind can be locked. But the world outside the room keeps logging. And that is where your file is going. Not yet, though. The outline tells you to stay here a little longer, in this locked room, because the people who do this tend to share another trait. They keep their story simple enough to remember at 3 in the morning. That detail matters because investigators do not only talk to you once, they talk to you at different times, on different days, with different moods in the room. A lie that requires complex timing is like juggling while walking. Eventually, you drop something, so the locked mind person chooses the simplest version. I was home. I was asleep. I do not remember. Simple sentences, short rails, and you, listening, might even find it soothing until you realize that simplicity is not a natural reflection of life. Life is cluttered. Life has errands. Life has interruptions. Life has a text message that changes your evening. A story with no clutter is a staged room. It looks clean because nobody lives there. The notes bring you back to the polygraph again. In the pre-test interview, the examiner goes over each question in advance. The subject is told what will be asked. This is meant to reduce surprise, to standardize understanding, but it also gives a rehearsed person a final chance to settle into the script. They practice answers in their head. They adjust wording. They decide where to pause. They treat the test like a recital. And if they are emotionally detached or practiced or simply stubborn, their body may not spike. The machine reads calm. The examiner sees calm. The report says no significant reaction. And the detective later reads the report and feels that old itch because the timeline still changes, because facts still do not line up. So the investigation does what it always does. It steps away from the performance and back toward the world. But before it gets there, the file gives you one more piece of the locked mind method. Something that shows up in interrogation rooms even without a polygraph. The subject answers only what is asked and nothing more. If you ask, "Did you go to the store?" they say no. They do not add, "I stayed home and watched this show, then called my sister, then fell asleep." They do not volunteer normal life because normal life creates details, and details create risk. This style can make someone look disciplined, even respectable. It can also make them look like they are guarding something, and guarding is the point. The notes in your file finally shift gently toward the next pivot because even the most rehearsed calm has a weakness. Real life keeps moving and it keeps generating timestamps. Sooner or later, the facts arrive. And when they do, the locked mind has to deal with them. That is when suspects stop hiding feelings and start hiding time. Time is harder to control than a face. Time is harder to charm than an examiner. Time is the one witness that never sleeps. So you turn the page and you follow the file into the next method, the slow, dreary art of delays, detours, and being hard to pin down. The time tricks start in places that look harmless, like calendars and voicemail and the soft bureaucratic language people use when they want you to stop asking questions. You are standing at the front desk of a station that smells like floor cleaner and old carpet glue. A clerk slides a clipboard toward you. The suspect is not here yet. Again. There is always an again with people who stall. The excuse is polite. It is almost reasonable. A headache, a flat tire, a sick kid, a boss who would not let them leave work, a misunderstood appointment time. It is never a slammed door. It is always a feather pillow over the moment. And you learn early in this job that a delay does not have to be dramatic to be effective. It just has to be consistent, like water dripping into a bucket, slow enough that nobody panics, fast enough that eventually the bucket fills. You can feel it in your own body. When it happens, the urgency cools. The case stops feeling like a fire and starts feeling like a pile of tasks. A follow-up call, another note, a reschedule, another form. Congratulations, you have just watched time turn into a defense strategy. Most people imagine beating a lie detector as a clever moment inside the room. A toe in a shoe, a bite of the tongue, a serene mental beach. But a lot of people do not try to beat the machine at all. They try to beat the schedule. They try to stretch the process until your attention wanders, until witnesses stop picking up the phone, until memories lose their sharp edges. Because memory is like chalk on wet pavement. It starts bright, it starts confident. Then the rain comes and the lines blur. You see it in the way a witness tells you. At first, I am sure it was Tuesday. Then, after a month of normal life piling on top, they say, well, it might have been Wednesday. I think it was Tuesday. And that small shift matters. It matters because time is the frame that holds everything else in place. If you can bend the frame, you can make the picture look different. So, the staller does what stallers do. They suggest other steps first. Sure, I will talk to you, but let me give you my phone voluntarily. Sure, I will do it at my lawyer's office next week. Sure, I will do the polygraph, but I have to travel for work. Sure, I will do it, but not until my mother is out of the hospital. They offer cooperation in installments, like paying off a debt with pennies, one slow drop at a time. And every time you accept a delay, you trade something away. You trade momentum. You trade surprise. You trade the clean pressure of a tight timeline. Because pressure in investigations is not about yelling. It is about sequence. It is about asking the right question before the person has time to build a comfortable lie around it. A practiced liar loves comfort. Comfort makes the lie feel like furniture. You read this in old notes like they are bedtime stories for tired detectives. The subject asked to postpone the test, and then postponed again, and then asked to change examiners, and then asked for a different day, and then claimed they never received the confirmation. Each request is small. Each request is a paper cut. No single paper cut kills you, but they bleed time. And time is the thing you cannot put back in the evidence locker. There is a particular kind of detour that shows up in these files. The helpful detour. It sounds like this. Before we do any polygraph stuff, I can show you where I was. I can drive you the route. I can point out the gas station. I can introduce you to the clerk who knows me. It feels like cooperation. It is also control. Because now the suspect is setting the agenda. They are choosing the order. They are choosing the environment. They are choosing where the conversation happens. And what they choose is rarely the sharp, quiet room where an examiner asks clean questions. They choose open air, movement, distraction, noise. The route they already rehearsed in their mind. You know what a drive around looks like in real life. You are in the passenger seat of a car that smells like air freshener and fast food. The suspect narrates like a tour guide. Here is the corner where I turned. Here is the store. Here is the light that always takes forever. You can feel, even without saying it, how the story becomes more believable because it is being performed in the real world. That is the trick. Humans confuse vividness with truth, but vividness can be staged. A liar can memorize a route. A liar can practice a tour. And while you ride around, time passes. Your phone buzzes. Another case calls. Another obligation tugs. You are still working, but you are working on their terms. Congratulations. You are now inside someone else's pacing. The file gives you a bland phrase for all of this. Operational delay. It sounds like a shipping problem. In practice, it is a method of blunting the emotional peak of an accusation. Right after a crime, the air is electric. Everybody is watching. Everybody is jumpy. People slip up because the world feels too loud. 2 weeks later, the same suspect sits in your interview room, and they have slept, they have eaten, they have spoken to their family, they have read articles, they have been coached by the internet, they have had time to build a version of themselves that can survive your questions. Even innocent people do this. In a way, innocent people rehearse too. They tell their story to friends. They repeat it until it stops shaking. That is what makes it hard. Delay is not always guilt. Delay is sometimes fear. Delay is sometimes work schedules and childcare and broken cars. But you learn to treat stalling the way you treat smoke. It might not be fire, but it is never nothing. There is another time trick that is even quieter. The suspect does not delay the test. They delay the decision around the test. They volunteer eagerly, but with conditions. I will take it, as long as it is done by my examiner. I will take it, as long as the questions are limited. I will take it, as long as my attorney approves each question. I will take it, as long as we do it after I talk to my therapist. Each condition can be argued as reasonable. Some of them are reasonable. People have rights. People have trauma. People have medical conditions. But conditions can also be fences. And fences make it harder to look around. You watch it happen in real time. You send an email. You wait. You get a response that asks for another response. You schedule a meeting. The meeting becomes another meeting. Days become weeks, and the case loses its sharp smell. The folder you are holding is proof of that. Old toner, old paper, old rain. One of the worst time tricks is the one that sounds like incompetence. The suspect misunderstands. They show up late. They bring the wrong paperwork. They forget identification. They thought it was next Tuesday. You want to be angry, but anger is not productive. You have to stay in the dull administrative lane. Reschedule, document, notify. The suspect apologizes. They look embarrassed. They look harmless. And harmlessness is part of the point. Because if they can make you see them as disorganized, you start to attribute the inconsistencies in their story to that same trait. Oh, they are just bad with time. They are just scattered. Congratulations, you have just watched someone try to turn deception into personality. The file includes a note about a suspect who became hard to pin down in the weeks after a death. He changed his phone number. Then he said he lost the new phone. Then he said he did not check voicemail. Then he said he was working nights and sleeping days. None of that is illegal. None of it screams guilt on its own. But the pattern matters. The pattern says, you will reach me when I decide you can. When you finally get him in a room, he is calm. He is almost cheerful. He says, sorry, it has been crazy lately. You can hear how easy that sentence is. Crazy lately. It covers everything. It explains nothing. It is a blanket tossed over a mess. The file points out another practical reason. Delays help. The world keeps overwriting itself. Surveillance footage gets recorded over. Some systems keep it for a week, some for a month, some for a day. If the owner never pays for extra storage, a delay can mean a camera that could have saved you quietly forgets. Receipts get thrown away. Store systems purge detailed transaction logs. Cell providers keep some data longer than others, but not forever. Location history can be disabled. Phones can be replaced. Time is not just memory. Time is retention policies. And criminals, even boring criminals, learn that the world forgets on schedule. So they stall until forgetting begins. You see a short case summary in the training appendix. A man suspected of a workplace theft agrees to a polygraph, then postpones it for a month, citing back pain. During that month, he replaces his phone. He loses the old one. He says he cannot recover messages. When the polygraph finally happens, it is clean enough to argue about. Not a hard fail, not a clear win, just noise. But the real damage was not in the chair. The damage was that the messages are gone. And now, instead of proving a timeline, you are proving a negative. You are standing in court someday explaining why you do not have what you wish you had. And you hate that. You hate it because it is not dramatic evil. It is just a person exploiting the normal decay of information. The file takes you back to your main subject, the one with the clean chart and the dirty facts. He did not refuse the polygraph. He asked for it, but later than you would expect. He waited until after he had given his first statement. Then he waited until after detectives asked follow-up questions. Then he waited until after he heard, through a friend, what the investigation was focusing on. He did not stall like a teenager avoiding homework. He stalled like a man waiting for test answers to leak. When he finally sat for the exam, he already knew the shape of the questions. That matters, because surprise is a kind of truth serum in investigations. Not because truth needs surprise, but because lies need preparation. A lie is a little machine. It needs gears. Truth can stumble out barefoot at midnight, so you make a note in your own tired handwriting, not poetic, just usable. He controlled the timing, and then you write the next line, because it always follows. What did he do with the time? That is the investigative pivot. Time is only useful if it is used. Maybe he used it to rehearse. Maybe he used it to move evidence. Maybe he used it to coordinate stories with other people. Maybe he used it to prepare his ordinary mask. Because that is what comes next, in your file and in your life. While time tricks play out, there is another method, quieter than charm and less theatrical than countermeasures. Some people try to make themselves so ordinary that suspicion slides off them. They do not fight the polygraph. They do not flirt with the examiner. They do not stall dramatically. They just become background. You know the type. You have met them in grocery store aisles, studying cereal boxes like it is a meaningful decision. You have met them in office lobbies, holding a coffee cup with both hands. You have met them in suburban driveways, waving at neighbors with the same small smile every day. Ordinary is not innocence, of course. Ordinary is just camouflage, and the best camouflage is the kind you stop noticing. You push your chair back slightly, and the folder makes that soft paper sound, like dry leaves. The rain is still there, still patient, still uninterested in your conclusions. The file calls it blandness as a disguise. It is a clinical phrase for something very human. If nobody remembers you, nobody describes you well. If nobody describes you well, you do not end up in the sketch artist's chair. You do not end up as the guy who stood out. So some criminals aim for forgettable, not because they are modest, because forgettable is a kind of invisibility. You picture it from the inside because this is how you learn it best. You are walking into a police station or a corporate office or a lawyer's waiting room. You are dressed in plain colors, no loud logos, nothing that sticks to memory. You sit with good posture. You speak politely. You do not make jokes that force people to react. You do not share opinions that create conflict. You speak in safe sentences, the kind that do not leave splinters in the mind. Yes, sir. No, ma'am. I understand. I appreciate it. I just want to clear this up. You offer small kindnesses, not the donuts, not the obvious bribe, the small ones. You hold a door. You thank the receptionist. You say, I know you are busy, because kindness feels like proof of innocence to a tired brain. It should not, but it does. It is a soft con. If you seem normal enough, people stop looking closely. They stop expecting the twist. And that is the whole point. There is a note in your file about the ordinary mask showing up in interviews. The suspect does not get angry. They do not get defensive. They do not cry theatrically. They react like someone in a customer service line, calm, mildly confused, slightly inconvenienced. They treat the interview like a misunderstanding, not like an accusation. And you can feel how tempting it is to accept that framing. Nobody wants to believe the person across from them is capable of something ugly. So the ordinary mask gives you permission to stop imagining ugliness. Congratulations, you have just been offered the easiest mental shortcut in the world. The file includes a small example from a fraud case. A bookkeeper moved money for months, small amounts, never enough to trigger alarms. When questioned, she wore a plain sweater, hair pulled back, no makeup. She spoke softly. She answered questions with a careful, gentle tone. She apologized often. She said she was not good with numbers, which is a hilarious thing for a bookkeeper to say, but it lands. If you are not listening closely, her whole presentation was designed to make her look incapable of sophisticated wrongdoing. And that is the ugly secret. You do not need sophistication to steal. You need time, access, and the willingness to do it again tomorrow. She did not beat anyone's lie detector. She beat everyone's assumptions about what a thief looks like. In another training vignette, a man suspected of violence was described by neighbors as quiet and normal. He mowed his lawn. He waved. He took his trash out at the right time. When investigators came around, neighbors offered his normality like an alibi. He is such a nice guy. He would never, but would never, is not evidence. It is just hope dressed up as certainty. And hope in investigations is not a tool. It is a trap. The ordinary mask works especially well in environments where everyone is busy. In a city, nobody studies you. In a workplace, everyone assumes you belong if you look like you belong. In a neighborhood, routines become invisibility. You can commit a lot of harm under the cover of routine. Because routine is boring, and boring is unmemorable. And unmemorable is safe. The file ties this back to polygraphs in a way that makes you nod, slowly, like you have heard it 1,000 times. A subject who looks ordinary often gets treated as ordinary. The examiner is human. The detective is human. The prosecutor is human. Humans make snap judgments, then spend hours pretending those judgments were rational. So the ordinary subject gets fewer hard questions, fewer sharp words, more benefit of the doubt, not always, but often enough to matter. And when the polygraph comes back, no significant reaction. That ordinary mask becomes reinforced. See? He seemed normal, and the test looked fine. It becomes a loop, but evidence does not care how pleasant someone is. Evidence does not care how normal their lawn looks. Evidence sits quietly, waiting to be noticed. That is why, when you get tired of faces and performances, you retreat to the gentle things, objects, timestamps, logs, the stuff that does not sweat. So the file pulls you out of personality and back into the evidence room, that fluorescent lit temple of boredom where truth is stored in boxes with barcode stickers. And it is here, in the quiet inventory of the world, that you start to see why lie detectors were never the main event. Because while people are busy managing breath and charm and delays, their phone is still talking. Not out loud, not dramatically, just in little pings and coordinates and routine connections. A phone's location history can be calmer than any confession. It just sits there and remembers. You picture it as you flip through the next pages, a map with little dots, a list of times. The kind of data that looks dull until you realize it is a timeline with teeth. At 11:13, the device is near a grocery store. At 11:27, it is on a highway. At 11:40, it is in a neighborhood the suspect claimed they have never visited. The phone does not care what story the suspect rehearsed. The phone does not care how calm they looked on a polygraph. The phone is like a dog that follows scent. It goes where it goes. Of course, phone data has limits. It is not magic. Sometimes it is imprecise. Sometimes it is missing. Sometimes it lies in its own way because signals bounce and towers overlap. So you treat it the way you treat everything, as one piece. But it is a powerful piece because it is boringly consistent. The file gives you another gentle witness, receipts. Receipts are the bedtime stories of commerce. Time, place, item. A small printed proof that a person was somewhere doing something ordinary. A coffee at 10:12, gas at 10:20, a fast food order at 10:30. A suspect says they were home all night. A receipt says they were at a drive-thru across town. The receipt does not get nervous. It does not have a lawyer. It does not need to remember. It just exists. Sometimes the smallest receipt holds an entire timeline together. A parking ticket, a toll transponder log, a store loyalty account purchase. People sign up for loyalty programs to save 40 cents on cereal and then act surprised when the system remembers where they were. Congratulations! You have just been betrayed by your own coupon. You turn to the section in the file about doorbell cameras. The modern neighborhood snitch mounted politely beside welcome mats. Doorbell cameras do not solve every case. Sometimes they are pointed at the wrong angle. Sometimes the footage is grainy. Sometimes the battery died. But when they work in a way that feels almost unfair. A clean little clip of a person walking by at a specific time. It is not dramatic, no music, no confession, just a figure moving through a rectangle of light. And because it is mundane, it is hard to argue with. The file includes an example where a suspect passed a polygraph about a break-in. The subject's charts were described as consistent with truth. Then an investigator canvassed the neighborhood anyway, because good investigators do not stop at comfortable results. A doorbell camera across the street caught the suspect's car at 2:47 in the morning. Headlights off for a moment, like the driver knew light is attention. The suspect later claimed, that could be any car, but it could not. The rims were distinctive, the bumper sticker was distinctive, the broken taillight was distinctive. The truth was not in the polygraph room. It was on a stranger's porch. You read about timestamps in general, and you feel the familiar comfort of them. Computer logins, badge access swipes, Wi-Fi connections, security system arm and disarm records, each one is small. Together, they build a skeleton of the night. And when someone tries to beat a test, they often forget the world is full of tiny record keepers. The file calls them passive data sources, a phrase so boring it almost puts you to sleep. But passive data is a quiet revolution in investigations. It turns alibis into math problems. If you say you were asleep, but your phone unlocked, and your car started, and your badge opened a door, and your messaging app shows activity, then your sleep story needs better legs. Even then, it is not automatic. People lend phones. Devices can be manipulated. Systems can be wrong. But the more independent sources you have, the harder it is to maintain a lie. It is like trying to hold back water with your hands. One leak becomes 10. The file offers a simple illustration. A man claims he never left home. His phone shows movement. He says his phone must have drifted in location. His car's onboard system, the kind that logs basic trip data, shows an engine start at 1:30. He says maybe the system is wrong. A neighbor's doorbell camera shows his vehicle leaving the driveway at 1:31. He says the timestamp might be off. A toll record shows his plate at 1:55. He says someone could have cloned the plate. You can see the shape of it now. Each piece of evidence becomes a new excuse. Each excuse becomes more complicated than the last. That is how lies die. Not with a dramatic confession, with an exhausting pile of explanations. The file lingers on one of your favorite ugly truths. The most boring evidence is often the most powerful. Not the bloody glove, not the dramatic note, not the screaming witness. The boring stuff. The log entry, the receipt, the camera clip of a car passing in the rain. Because boring evidence does not require interpretation of emotion. It does not care who looked calm. It does not care who cried. It is just there. You turn the page and find a section about timelines built from digital exhaust. That phrase always makes you think of a car idling in the dark, leaving fumes. Every modern life leaves exhaust. Your phone pings towers. Your apps talk to servers. Your car talks to satellites. Your watch counts steps. Even if you are trying to be invisible, your devices are gossiping. The file gives you a gentle reality check, the kind you appreciate. Investigators do not sit around waiting for one perfect piece. They build a timeline like a quilt, many small squares stitched together, and every square has chain of custody and paperwork and requests to companies that move slowly. Justice moves like an old elevator. Slow, noisy, stubbornly mechanical. This is where the boring crime part becomes almost literal, because the real work is emails and subpoenas and waiting on returns. You can picture yourself because you have lived it. You are at a desk under fluorescent light, filling out forms with the same tired pen. You are writing a request for records, listing dates and times, and account identifiers. You are not chasing a killer through alleyways. You are chasing a spreadsheet. But spreadsheets catch people. Spreadsheets do not care about charisma. The file gives you another example, soft and telling. A suspect tried to beat a polygraph by controlling breathing. The examiner noted steady respiration and minimal reaction. But the suspect made one mistake. He forgot about his own navigation app. The app kept a history of trips, little lines on a map, addresses. The suspect said he never went near the victim's area. The app showed him there twice in the days before, not on the night of the crime, before, like scouting, like curiosity, like something he would never mention out loud. And that detail did what the polygraph could not. It gave motive a place to stand. It suggested premeditation without needing a confession. You sit with that because it is always the pre-crime behavior that feels most honest. People can rehearse what they did after. They can rehearse where they claim they were during, but they often forget the quiet lead-up, the searching, the driving by, the late-night internet rabbit holes. The file shifts gently to another kind of evidence that does not lie, the physical kind, but not the cinematic kind, not the dramatic blood spatter patterns that television loves. The small, dull things, fibers, dirt, tool marks, paint transfer, a pry mark on a window, a shoe print in a muddy edge of lawn, a broken latch that tells you which window was used. Forensics, in real life, is mostly patient observation. It is not a eureka moment. It is a person in gloves photographing something that looks like nothing. The file reminds you, in its own dry way, that lie detectors are not used to prove facts. They are used to pressure a person. The proving happens elsewhere, in the quiet, methodical work of matching the world to the story. And once the quiet objects speak up, you start to see why the polygraph was never the center of gravity. It was just a lever to make someone talk or to make them commit to a claim that evidence can later crush. You read that sentence and you nod, because that is exactly how it plays out. A polygraph is often used because it feels official. It feels like science in a room where everything else is messy human language. People fear it, people respect it, people misunderstand it. And misunderstanding is useful if your goal is to shake a confession loose. So the file finally turns toward the question that always comes up, like a tired caller on a late-night radio show. If lie detectors are flawed, why do they stay around? Not because they are perfect, because they are effective in a different way. They create pressure without violence. They create a moment where a suspect has to choose. Do I take it and risk looking deceptive, or do I refuse and look suspicious? Either choice can be spun against them. Socially, the file spells it out with a kind of weary honesty you appreciate. The real value is often the conversation before and after the test. In the pre-test, you get the story. You get the framing. You get the suspect agreeing to the wording. In the post-test, you get the reaction. Do they become angry? Do they shut down? Do they suddenly remember new details? A confident result can be misleading. A nervous result can be innocent. So, investigators treat it like weather. Informative sometimes, never the whole forecast. And there is a particular kind of trick that happens in real cases. The test becomes an interrogation tool even if the charts are never used. A suspect is told they failed, even if the result was inconclusive. This is not science, it is psychology. It is a tactic. It is controversial, and it can produce false confessions, especially in vulnerable people. But it happens because the polygraph carries authority. The suspect thinks the machine knows. The suspect thinks denial is useless. The suspect starts bargaining with reality. And you, sitting in your chair, do not romanticize this. You have seen the damage it can do. A guilty person might confess. An innocent person might panic and say something that sounds wrong. The file includes a brief cautionary note. Use with care. That is the polite way of saying, do not let this tool ruin your case. Because the tool can muddy things. It can give defense attorneys something to attack. It can create a side story that distracts from real evidence. So why do agencies still use them? Because sometimes they work, not as truth detectors, as conversation shapers. The file gives you an example from an internal investigation. A police officer suspected of misconduct agrees to a polygraph to clear his name. He passes, or is said to pass. The case slows. People breathe easier. Later, body-worn camera footage surfaces, and it contradicts his version completely. The polygraph did not protect him from evidence. It protected him from suspicion for a little while. That little while mattered. It gave him time to coordinate stories. It gave him time to prepare. Time again. Always time. And you see why your folder began the way it did, with results that looked clean and facts that felt dirty. Because lie detectors are not final. They are just one more fog source in a room full of fog sources. The file moves through the common misunderstandings. People assume a pass equals innocence. It does not. People assume a fail equals guilt. It does not. People assume the machine reads lies. It reads bodies. Bodies react for all kinds of reasons: fear, shame, trauma, anger, confusion, sleep deprivation, medication, even the simple dread of being judged. And some people, guilty people, can stay calm. Some have practiced. Some are detached. Some are simply arrogant. Some have lied so often the lie no longer scratches them inside. So the polygraph remains, not because it is a perfect instrument, but because it is a social instrument. It creates an event. It creates a story point. He refused. She demanded. Won. He passed. She failed. Those phrases travel fast through offices and families and news cycles. Faster than actual evidence, which has to be requested, verified, processed, and explained. A lie detector result is easy to say. A cell site analysis takes an hour to explain, and most people stop listening at minute 2. So the polygraph survives because it fits the human desire for simple answers. But investigations are not simple. They are slow, settling processes, paperwork and patience and quiet facts. The file reminds you that cases close with mundane things: a warrant return, a lab result, a timestamp that finally lines up, not with dramatic monologues. And that is where your night is heading, toward the slow settling of a case and the parts that never settle at all. But you are not there yet. Not fully, because before a file closes, it usually has a phase where everything looks almost finished, and one corner still itches. One corner that refuses to lay flat, no matter how many clean charts and polite smiles you stack on top. In your main case, the suspect's polygraph was treated like a soft pass. He went back to his routine. He looked ordinary again. He kept working. He kept waving at neighbors. He kept living like a man who believes he has outrun the moment. But then, the quiet objects started to speak. It was not one dramatic discovery. It was a sequence, a drip. First, the phone record came in, showing a brief connection to a tower near the area he claimed he never visited. Not conclusive by itself, just irritating. Then a receipt surfaced, a small cash purchase at a convenience store, time-stamped in a window that made his claimed route impossible. Then, a neighbor's camera caught his car returning later than he said. Each detail is small. Each detail is boring. Together, they begin to pull his story apart like loose thread. You can feel the shift in the investigation when that happens. The room changes temperature. Detectives stop asking, "Could it be him?" and start asking, "How did he think he could explain this?" Because that is the thing about rehearsed calm and ordinary masks. They rely on the assumption that no one will check deeply. They rely on fatigue. They rely on people wanting to move on. But sometimes you get an investigator who cannot let the itch go. So you watch the next interview unfold in the notes like a quiet play. The suspect sits across from you again. Same posture, same mild expression, same controlled voice. He says, "I already did the polygraph." He says it like a shield, like a stamp on his forehead, like you are being rude by continuing. But you do not argue about polygraphs. You do not fight that battle in the room. You let the shield stay in his hand. You just slide a photo across the table, a still image from a camera. It shows his car. It shows the time in the corner. It shows rain on the lens, making everything look slightly blurred, but not blurred enough. You ask calmly, "Help me understand this." And this is where the real value of earlier tactics becomes obvious. If he had never taken the polygraph, he might have refused the interview. He might have lawyered up harder. He might have stayed distant. But he took it. He felt safe. He felt certified. So he is here, in the room, having to respond. That is the lever. The file notes what he did next. A time trick. Again, he tried to expand the window. He tried to loosen the frame. He said maybe the camera time was wrong. He said maybe the date was wrong. He said maybe his brother borrowed the car. You listen and you let him talk, because talking is where people build the walls that later trap them. Then you bring out the receipt. The timestamp matches the camera window. Then you bring out the phone tower. Ping. It matches too. Now it is not one object versus his story. It is several. And his explanations begin to stack. Time wrong, date wrong, brother driving, phone glitch, receipt coincidence. Each one is possible. All of them together become silly. And that is how boring evidence wins. Not by being dramatic, by being redundant. A guilty person can explain one weird thing. They struggle to explain 5 weird things that all point the same direction. The file does not give you a clean confession here. Real life rarely does. It gives you something quieter. The suspect's ordinary mask begins to crack, not with rage, but with fatigue. His voice tightens, his patience thins, his polite tone becomes clipped. He starts saying, "This is ridiculous." He starts acting offended, as if offense can erase timestamps. Congratulations! You have reached the point where performance stops being fun. The notes say, "The interview ended without admission. The suspect requested counsel." The room went quiet again. That is often how it goes. No big ending, just another door closing, another form filed, another step in a long staircase. And yet, the case kept moving because, in the end, lie detectors stay around for one reason that is both practical and depressing. They make people commit. They make people choose a posture and then hold it. And once a person has chosen, the investigation can test that choice against reality. Reality is slow, but it is stubborn. The file turns gently toward the idea that should have been obvious from the beginning. A polygraph is not the main event because it cannot replace evidence. It can only create pressure, and pressure can create mistakes. The weird methods people use to beat lie detectors are usually small, human, and a little sad. A toe pressed into a shoe, a smile held too long, a rescheduled appointment, a plain sweater, a routine wave. None of it is genius. Most crime is not genius. It is repetition. It is opportunity. It is arrogance. It is the belief that other people are too busy to look closely. And sometimes other people are too busy. Sometimes cases do go cold because time wins, because footage overwrites, because detectives retire, because paperwork piles up. That is the part nobody likes to say out loud. So you keep reading and you let the rain do its work on the night, because the next pages in the folder are not about tricks anymore. They are about what happens when the tricks fail. And the file starts to close, but not cleanly. Not every case ends with a neat stamp and a satisfying sentence. Some end with a plea deal that feels like compromise. Some end with charges that get dismissed for reasons that have nothing to do with truth. Some end with a conviction that leaves you uneasy. Some end with nothing at all. But even in the cases that end, there are unanswered corners. There are quiet lessons. There is always something that still itches, and you can feel the narrative sliding toward that sleepy part of the night where the work is not chasing, but sorting, deciding what you can prove and what you can only suspect. The file does not let you forget one last point about those clean polygraph results. A beaten lie detector rarely means a perfect crime. It usually means a momentary fog in the room. Fog does not erase the street. It just delays the sight of it. So you sit there in the dim pool of lamplight and you feel the weight of the paper in your hands. You think about the strange comfort people take in machines, the belief that a device can relieve them of judgment. But judgment is still yours. It is still human. It still has to be backed by something that can survive scrutiny. And that means you go back again and again to the quiet objects, to the phone pings, the receipts, the camera clips, the door logs, because those things do not care if you looked calm. They do not care if you were charming. They do not care if you postponed the appointment 3 times. They just Remember, and as you keep turning pages, you start to feel that familiar end stage of an investigation approaching. Not an ending, not a conclusion, just the slow settling, like dust after footsteps. You are left staring at a checklist that is both comforting and bleak. Lab requests, records returns, follow-up interviews, case review, the kind of list that looks like nothing until you realize it contains someone's entire life reduced to tasks. You rub your eyes, you read another line, and you can feel one corner of the story refusing to lie flat. A detail that does not fit the timeline